close your eyes and step back to a Friday evening when the world smelled like gasoline, salt air, and French fries. When the glow of a drive-in marquee felt like a promise and the night stretched as wide as the blacktop. Before smartphones and endless scrolls, being a teenager in the 70s and 80s meant streets and schoolyards, the mall, and the music. A cassette rattling in the dash, a quarter warm in your palm for Pac-Man, laughter bouncing between parked cars under a violet sky. You can hear it if you listen softly. A subway car rattling past fresh graffiti, the Staten Island ferry cutting a pale wake, beach radios crackling at Venice, a record store doorbell tapping as cool air spills out over shelves of ABBA and New Wave. In living rooms, wood grain TVs hum. In kitchens, a TV dinner steams beside a stack of Polaroids. In bedrooms, posters wrinkle at the corners, while someone writes their name on the inside cover of a notebook and hopes the right person notices. Christmas lights tangle in the garage next to a BMX with scuffed pedals. Somewhere, Judy Collins sings to a summer crowd. Downtown, the CBGB sign glows like a dare. Welcome back to Sleepytown Radio. Quiet stories for quiet hearts. Tonight, we'll drift through those ordinary miracles. Kmart aisles and A&P carts, orange Julius cups sweating in the mall, burger wrappers on the hood of a car that shakes to the baseline, a first ride down an empty street where freedom tastes like cold air and possibility. Breathe in, slow and even. Let the past arrive the way it always does, sideways, gentle, familiar. We'll move at an easy pace, the way memory prefers, letting each scene open like a page you once dog-eared and meant to keep. And we'll begin where so many teenage nights began, under the soft roar of a dozen engines in a halo of headlights and laughter, the high school parking lot. There was a special kind of magic in the high school parking lots of the 1970s and 1980s, an ordinary stretch of pavement that somehow became the stage for teenage life. As the last bell rang, books were tossed into lockers, and footsteps carried eager hearts out into the fading light. That's where the real day began. Outside, with engines humming, radios crackling, and a crowd of young faces gathering around cars that seemed almost as important as the people who drove them. Imagine the line of vehicles. Muscle cars with polished hoods, pickup trucks with scuffed tailgates, and the occasional hand-me-down sedan with worn seats and a story of its own. Every car told you something about the person behind the wheel, about their family, about how far they might drive that night. Some leaned proudly against shiny Plymouths or Barracudas, while others simply sat cross-legged on the asphalt, a soda bottle between them, laughter floating above the rows of headlights. It was the place where music lived. Cassette decks rattled out the latest rock station, or an 8-track slid into place with a satisfying click. The sound spilled into the evening, drifting between conversations and shouts, weaving together a soundtrack of youth. Maybe it was Led Zeppelin on one end, Fleetwood Mac on the other, and a Motown tune humming in between. The parking lot was never silent. It carried the pulse of a generation. And then there were the rituals. A football game on Friday night meant the lot filled long before kickoff. Friends in Letterman jackets, cheerleaders practicing moves, the smell of popcorn carried from the stadium. Couples found quiet corners to talk, while groups of friends plotted the weekend, a trip to the drive-in, a late-night diner stop, or just cruising up and down Main Street with the windows rolled low. Sometimes the magic was in the smallest details. The way a girl leaned into a car window, twirling the cord of a payphone receiver before calling home to say she'd be late. The way boys gathered in circles, flipping through magazines, talking about engines and basketball scores. A simple place became the backdrop for the dreams and dramas of teenage life. There were arguments too, doors slamming, voices raised, only to soften again when a familiar song played from someone's radio. There was nervousness as new drivers adjusted mirrors and gripped steering wheels, hoping to impress. And there was joy, the kind that came when laughter echoed in the cool evening air, when friendships felt endless, when the night had no clear ending. Parents might have seen only asphalt and parked cars, but for teenagers it was freedom itself. The parking lot was a passport into independence, into belonging, into the first taste of being truly seen. It wasn't just a place to leave your car. It was where reputations were shaped, where crushes sparked, and where Friday nights began. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might hear it. The muffled thump of a bass line through car doors, the squeal of sneakers on pavement, the rise of a dozen conversations blending into one warm, restless hum. A simple high school lot, somewhere in America, sometime in the 70s or 80s. And yet, to those who were there, it was everything. And as the engines turned over, headlights beamed into the dusk, and tires rolled slowly out onto the street, the night itself opened wide, waiting, promising, alive. The high school parking lot was just the beginning. If the high school parking lot was where the evening began, the drive-in theater was where it truly came alive. Across the 1970s and into the early 1980s, nothing carried the promise of freedom and youth quite like those glowing outdoor screens, rising above rows of cars pointed neatly toward the silver canvas. Long before Netflix and scrolling feeds, the drive-in was the gathering place of a generation, a place where stories unfolded not only on the screen, but in the quiet laughter and whispered conversations inside each car. Imagine pulling in just as the sun dipped low, headlights dimmed as attendants waved cars into long rows. The smell of buttered popcorn drifted across the warm air, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline and fresh-cut grass. Radios buzzed with the movie's soundtrack, sometimes crackling with static, while fireflies flickered at the edges of the lot. A boy climbed into the back of a pickup truck, spreading out a blanket, while a group of friends shared sodas and French fries, leaning against the hood as if the night itself belonged to them. The drive-in was where first dates happened. Awkward smiles, nervous glances, and hands inching closer in the dark. It was where circles of friends gathered, piling 6 or 7 teenagers into a car that had no business holding that many. Laughter echoed between vehicles as someone tried to balance a tray of milkshakes, or when the film's dialogue was drowned out by a car horn pressed accidentally in the excitement. The glow of the screen made every face look softer, every expression a little more dreamlike. There was something communal about it all. Families sat together on folding lawn chairs, kids chasing each other barefoot in the gravel until the previews rolled. Teenagers lingered near the concession stand, jukebox humming with the latest songs, while lines formed for hot dogs, nachos, and candy bars wrapped in shiny foil. The chatter and footsteps faded as the movie began. Yet even then, the real magic was less about the film and more about the setting. the chance to be young, to belong, to feel a part of something larger. Sometimes the movie hardly mattered. A couple leaned against a Camaro, sharing secrets under a star-patched sky. Friends in the back row planned next weekend's party, their voices hushed but filled with anticipation. A lone teenager, sitting on the hood of his father's old sedan, gazed not at the film but at the distant horizon, wondering where life might carry him after high school. The drive-in was more than entertainment. It was ritual. It stitched together the rhythm of small-town life. Friday nights filled with anticipation, summer evenings painted with laughter, autumn air carrying the scent of wood smoke as jackets were pulled tighter. Every car, every voice, every flicker of light became part of a memory that still lingers for those who were there. Even now, the thought of a drive-in brings back the glow of headlights stretching into the night, the shuffle of gravel beneath tires, the hum of conversations overlapping with the soundtrack. It was a teenage world that lived somewhere between the movie on the screen and the life unfolding just outside of it. And for countless young Americans in the 70s and 80s, it was one of the first places where freedom tasted real, salty with popcorn, sweet with soda, and endless beneath the stars. And when the credits rolled and cars began to file out, taillights glowing red in the summer dark, the night still felt unfinished. For many, the drive-in was not the ending, but only the beginning, because down the road, another hangout always waited. A diner, a friend's basement, or just the wide open streets of America, calling teenagers further into the night. Fashion in the 1970s and 1980s was more than fabric and color. It was a language, a declaration, and a way for teenagers to carve out who they were becoming. When you look back, the clothes and hairstyles of those decades feel almost larger than life. And yet, for the boys and girls who wore them, they were simply the everyday expressions of youth. In the early 70s, the look was casual, earthy, and a little bit free-spirited. Denim ruled. Faded jeans with wide flared legs, worn soft from repeated washes, sometimes frayed at the bottom from brushing against the pavement. Jean jackets, patched with band logos or stitched with peace signs, were passed around like badges of identity. On summer afternoons, crop tops appeared, loose cotton or snug knits that revealed a playful slice of midriff. To wear one wasn't just about comfort under the sun. It was a statement of confidence, a whisper of independence. Short dresses and skirts floated in bright prints, florals, and patterns that seemed to belong as much to music festivals as they did to school hallways. The simplicity of a sundress paired with sandals spoke of an optimism woven into the fabric of the decade. Hairstyles were softer, natural, often parted down the middle and flowing freely, as if reflecting the era's yearning for openness. For teenage girls, long straight hair or gentle waves became a symbol of youthful ease. For boys, shaggy haircuts and sideburns were worn with pride. But as the decade turned, the 80s walked in with a louder voice, and fashion grew bolder, sharper, and unapologetically vibrant. Colors brightened, silhouettes expanded, hair grew bigger, permed, teased, sprayed high until it seemed to defy gravity. A teenager stepping into the halls of an 80s high school might be greeted by a wave of neon leg warmers, bold geometric prints, oversized jackets, and sneakers in colors no one had dared to wear before. Crop tops didn't disappear. They became even more daring. Paired with high-waisted jeans or skirts, they carried the spark of confidence into the new decade. Short dresses now often shimmered with metallic fabrics, sequins, or bold stripes, echoing the rhythms of disco and the pulse of MTV. Sweatbands wrapped around foreheads and wrists, not only in gyms but on sidewalks and at malls, reflecting the fitness craze that swept across the country. There was a freedom in experimenting. Teens mixed styles shamelessly, combining denim jackets with lace, pairing band t-shirts with miniskirts, layering accessories in ways that made each outfit unique. The fashion of those years was less about following rules and more about breaking them, testing boundaries and discovering self-expression, and behind every look was a feeling. The girl tugging her crop top into place before meeting friends at the drive-in carried a secret thrill of belonging. The boy adjusting the collar of his denim jacket before leaning against his car in the high school lot felt a small jolt of pride. Clothes were not just worn, they were performed. They told the world, "This is who I am," at least for now. For many, those styles were tied to music. A leather jacket meant rock and roll. A pair of bell-bottoms might echo the beat of funk. Bright neon hinted at the energy of arcade games and synth pop. Even hair became an instrument of expression, soft waves whispering of the 70s, towering curls and sprayed bangs shouting the arrival of the 80s. Looking back, it's easy to smile at the photos. Teenagers grinning in Polaroids, standing together in outfits that now feel like time capsules. Girls in short dresses with hems that seemed scandalous to their parents. Boys with combs tucked into their back pockets. Groups of friends leaning together, their hair catching the glow of a street lamp, their shoes scuffed from long walks through shopping malls. Fashion was memory made visible. It carried the warmth of summer nights, the nervous energy of first dates, the pride of standing out, and the comfort of fitting in. Those crop tops, short dresses, jean jackets, and sweatbands might now be folded into nostalgia, but in their time, they were as alive as the heartbeat of youth itself. And so, when we remember teenagers of the 1970s and 1980s, it is impossible to separate them from what they wore. For in every bright color, in every bold hairstyle, in every simple cotton crop top, there was a story of freedom, of courage, of a generation finding its style, and in doing so, finding itself. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, some of the sweetest memories weren't found at concerts or on summer beaches, but in the ordinary aisles of grocery stores and the neon glow of fast food chains. Everyday places, A&P, Kmart, Sears, Woolworths, were not just errands for parents, but small adventures where young people found their own kind of wonder. Picture a Saturday afternoon, the kind where families piled into the car, kids squeezed into the back seat, and the smell of vinyl and sunshine followed them down the road. At the A&P, carts rattled across polished linoleum floors, the cool blast of air conditioning greeting sunburnt faces. Teenagers wandered off down aisles lined with cereal boxes, each brightly colored, each with a toy or prize inside that called out like treasure. Choosing between Cap'n Crunch or Lucky Charms felt like a decision of great importance. In the frozen section, glass doors frosted over with the chill of TV dinners, aluminum trays stacked neatly, promising Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and apple cobbler that baked into something simple yet unforgettable. For many, it was a staple of weeknights, a quick meal after homework, or before heading out with friends. Even the vending machines inside or just outside the stores had their magic. Bottles of Coca-Cola pulled cold from a red machine, the hiss of carbonation greeting thirsty teenagers on summer days. And then there was the ritual of fast food. After ball games, after movies, or simply after wandering through town, places like McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, and Dairy Queen became the gathering spots. Golden arches glowed against the evening sky, drawing cars into lots filled with laughter. Teenagers leaned against hoods, French fries in hand, milkshakes sweating in the heat of July. Inside, the booths filled with chatter, with jackets tossed across the seats and trays stacked with burgers wrapped in paper that crinkled under eager fingers. Pizza Hut in the 70s was more than dinner. It was atmosphere. Those red and white checkered tablecloths, stained glass lamps hanging low over wooden booths, and the smell of pepperoni mixing with laughter. Teenagers crowded around arcade games tucked into corners, waiting for pizza to arrive, their pockets jingling with quarters. The soft glow of those restaurants felt like a world all its own, a place to linger long after the plates were cleared. Burger King had its own charm. The familiar crowns handed to kids, the smell of flame-grilled patties drifting out to meet the parking lot. For teenagers working their first jobs, slipping into the brown and orange uniforms, it was a first taste of responsibility, of paychecks cashed and spent on music, gas, or a Saturday night out. And for their friends, those stops became the backdrop of countless nights, sitting in booths, teasing one another, planning the weekend. Even grocery stores carried a rhythm of youth. A teenager pushing a cart with their mother might sneak glances at magazines near the checkout, pages filled with rock stars, fashion icons, and glimpses of a wider world. Others slipped candy bars onto the conveyor belt, hoping they'd pass unnoticed, though often a smile from a parent was enough to let it slide. These stores were more than commerce. They were memory, stitched into the fabric of family routines, the smell of French fries, the rattle of a grocery cart, the clink of glass soda bottles. These details remain vivid because they were ordinary moments made unforgettable by the people who lived them. For teenagers, those places were stages of everyday life, where laughter was shared, secrets whispered, and time passed in ways that seemed small, but would grow luminous in hindsight. Looking back now, the aisles of A&P and the booths at McDonald's feel like warm snapshots of a vanished America, an America where teenagers lingered under fluorescent lights and neon signs, finding pieces of freedom in the simplest places. And in those moments, surrounded by food, friends, and family, life was uncomplicated, comforting, and perfectly enough. For teenagers of the 1970s and 1980s, New York City was both a playground and a proving ground. The city's rhythm pulsed through their days, fast, loud, unrelenting. Yet within that chaos, there was a kind of freedom, a feeling that the whole world was waiting just beyond the next corner. Picture a spring afternoon in 1973. Midtown traffic clogs the avenues, yellow cabs weaving between jaywalking pedestrians who pay no mind to the lights. Teenagers dart across streets, backpacks bouncing, sneakers skidding on the pavement. A group of friends gathers on the steps of a brownstone, laughing, their voices competing with the distant horns of idling cars. To grow up here was to move quickly, to claim your space among millions, Down below, the subway told its own story. Graffiti bloomed across the sides of trains. Names, colors, bold letters sprayed in the night. To some, it was vandalism. To the kids who rode those trains, it was art, a restless language of youth. Inside the cars, scratched windows and metal poles bore witness to countless commutes. Students clutching textbooks, skateboarders balancing their boards, young couples sharing headphones from a cassette player, the screech of steel on steel, the dim lights flickering overhead. It was gritty, it was alive, and it was theirs. On the Staten Island ferry, the wind whipped across the deck as teenagers leaned over the railing, pointing toward the skyline. The twin towers rose above the harbor, a promise of modern power against the slow churn of the waves. Some clutched cameras, snapping Polaroids of friends smiling with hair blown wild, while others simply gazed quietly, lost in thought. It was a ride that cost only a few coins, yet felt like an escape into another world. Brooklyn carried its own energy. Streets where kids turned sidewalks into playgrounds, bouncing basketballs against brick walls, chalk lines marking improvised courts. In Lynch Park, Latin youths lounged in the summer heat, music drifting from portable radios. On hot July days, fire hydrants were cracked open, spraying arcs of water while children laughed and teenagers cooled themselves in the spray. Shirts plastered to their backs. The city wasn't always kind. There were shadows, too. Abandoned lots scattered with broken glass, empty buildings looming over narrow alleys, and headlines about crime that shaped the fears of parents. But for the teenagers who lived it, New York was never just danger. It was discovery. It was the thrill of finding a new record shop tucked beneath a stairwell, or slipping into a crowded arcade near Times Square, the glow of Pac-Man machines lighting up tired faces. What made it unforgettable was the sheer mix of life. On one block, a boy with a basketball. On another, a girl with shopping bags from Macy's. Street vendors selling pretzels. Subway performers strumming guitars, the smell of roasted chestnuts mingling with exhaust fumes. It was messy, unpredictable, but it made every teenager feel alive, as if the city itself was urging them forward. For those who came of age here, the memory lingers like the echo of footsteps on concrete. The graffiti-covered trains, the ferry rides across the bay, the endless noise of Manhattan traffic, all of it framed their youth. And though the years have softened those sharp edges into nostalgia, the heartbeat of New York in the 70s and 80s still lives in them, reminding us that teenage freedom could thrive even in the busiest, wildest city in America. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, California's beaches were more than stretches of sand and surf. They were a state of mind. To walk barefoot along the shore, to feel the Pacific wind push against your shoulders, was to taste freedom in its purest form. It was a freedom that belonged especially to the young, who filled those beaches with laughter, radios, and sunburned dreams. Picture Los Angeles in the mid-70s. Venice Beach buzzing with skaters weaving between tourists, their wheels clattering over cracked pavement, hair blowing wild as the ocean mist settled on their skin. Just beyond them, muscle-bound athletes lifted weights under the sun at Muscle Beach, while teenagers leaned against the railing, sipping sodas, pretending not to stare, but staring all the same. The boardwalk was alive. Street performers juggling, artists painting caricatures, and teens drifting in groups, looking for nothing in particular, yet feeling like they might find everything. Daytona Beach carried its own pulse, further east but just as vivid in memory. Cars pulled right onto the sand, teenagers perched on hoods, radios blasting as waves crashed only a few feet away. Friends tossed frisbees across the surf, and couples carved their initials into wet sand, hoping the tide wouldn't steal them too quickly. These beaches weren't only backdrops for fun, they were stages for identity, places where teenagers showed off new fashions, crop tops, short shorts, mirrored sunglasses, and carried themselves as though the world was watching. Summer days blurred into evenings. Bonfires crackled along the shore, sparks flying up into the purple sky. Guitars strummed gently while groups of friends circled close, passing marshmallows on sticks, telling stories that grew taller as the night grew darker. The smell of salt mixed with wood smoke, and the ocean itself seemed to breathe with them, steady and eternal. For a teenager lying back on a blanket, listening to the steady rhythm of the tide, life felt wide open. Tomorrow was too far away to worry about. The beaches were also a place of small rebellions. Parents thought they were safe, but teenagers knew the shoreline belonged to them. It was where first cigarettes were lit, where first kisses were stolen behind lifeguard towers, where secrets were shared in whispers drowned out by the crash of waves. A skateboard rolled lazily across the boardwalk, a bike chain clattered back into place, a surfboard tilted under the weight of a hopeful beginner. Every sound etched itself into memory. Even the simple act of walking barefoot down the hot sand left its mark. Sunscreen smelled like coconut and zinc. Radios played everything from the Eagles to Blondie, and laughter carried easily over the roar of the surf. It didn't matter if you lived in California or were only visiting for a week in July. Those beaches stitched themselves into your youth. They were snapshots of a time when life felt uncomplicated, when the horizon stretched endlessly, as if promising the future itself. Looking back now, those barefoot summers seem golden, sunlit from edge to edge. They live on in photographs, smiling faces squinting against the light, towels striped in bright colors, a frisbee frozen mid-flight. But more than pictures, they live in the feeling, the warm grit of sand between your toes, the sting of salt water on sunburned skin, the hush that comes when the sun sinks low and paints the Pacific in shades of fire. For teenagers of the 70s and 80s, the beaches were freedom embodied. They were places where youth could run wild, where friendships deepened under endless skies, and where time itself seemed to pause, long enough for memories to take root and last a lifetime. If there was one language that every teenager in the 1970s and 1980s spoke, it was music. Long before streaming playlists and earbuds, music wasn't just background. It was the center of life, the heartbeat of youth. For a generation growing up with records, radios, and cassette tapes, music carried both freedom and identity, filling bedrooms, schoolyards, and endless nights with rhythm and possibility. Imagine Central Park in June of 1973. A crowd gathers at the Schaefer Bandstand to hear Judy Collins sing, the towers of Midtown Manhattan rising dramatically in the background. Teenagers sit cross-legged in the grass, swaying to the sound of her voice carried on the summer breeze. Couples hold hands, friends lean close, and for a few hours the noise of the city softens into harmony. To be there was to feel part of something larger than yourself. A chorus of youth, each heart keeping time with the music. On another night, the energy shifted. At CBGB in the East Village, the lights were dim, the stage was small, but the sound was raw and unforgettable. Teenagers packed shoulder to shoulder, their ears ringing, their voices hoarse from shouting lyrics back to the bands. Punk and new wave carved their mark into the city, and the young carried those echoes home with them, scribbling lyrics on notebooks, practicing guitar chords in basements, and dreaming of being on stage themselves. But it wasn't only the live shows. Music pulsed everywhere, in car stereos, in malls, even on street corners where boomboxes rattled against concrete. A teenager slipping a quarter into a jukebox at a diner could change the mood of an entire booth of friends. The needle dropped, the first notes played, and suddenly laughter grew louder, conversations quicker, as the music lifted the moment higher. The images of the time still linger. ABBA smiling in iconic portraits, their music spinning on turntables at house parties. Young people dancing barefoot at school gyms, lights dimmed low. A group of friends crowded around an arcade machine, Pac-Man flashing in the background, while a cassette deck hissed beside them. For teenagers, music wasn't separated from daily life. It was stitched into every detail. Even the act of buying music was a ritual. Record stores were sacred ground. Rows of albums stretched before wide-eyed teenagers who flipped through covers, studying the artwork, running fingers over plastic wrap that gleamed under fluorescent lights. To bring home a new album meant more than owning songs. It meant holding a piece of culture, of identity. Sitting cross-legged on bedroom floors, teens listened from start to finish, reading liner notes like scripture, memorizing lyrics until they became part of them. Concert life wasn't only about sound, it was about belonging. Teenagers left shows with ringing ears and sore feet, but also with stories they would tell for decades. Stories of sneaking into shows, of saving up for tickets, of road trips in old cars, just to stand in the glow of stage lights, whether it was a polished performance in a stadium or a gritty show in a basement club. Each carried the same electricity, the thrill of being young and caught up in a moment too big to last, but too powerful to forget. Looking back, music from the 1970s and 1980s isn't just remembered as sound, it is remembered as life itself. The echo of voices in Central Park, the crowded heat of CBGB, the glow of jukebox lights in diners, the joy of tearing plastic off a brand new album. For teenagers, music was more than entertainment. It was freedom, rebellion, comfort, and joy. It was the soundtrack of becoming. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, Christmas was more than just a holiday. It was a season of anticipation, warmth, and rituals that stitched families together. The glow of colored lights strung along rooftops, the soft hum of carols playing on the radio, the crunch of boots on snow-dusted sidewalks, all of it formed the backdrop to memories that have lingered for decades. Imagine a living room on Christmas morning. A tree stands tall in the corner, branches heavy with tinsel and ornaments collected through the years. Beneath it lie neatly wrapped boxes, the corners taped with care, some disguised in old department store catalogs turned into wrapping paper. Teenagers, sleepy but unable to resist the pull of the morning, shuffle in behind younger siblings, the scent of pine mixing with coffee brewing in the kitchen. The gifts were often simple, yet unforgettable. An Atari console, waiting to be plugged into the family television, promising hours of new adventures pixel by pixel. A BMX bike, gleaming and sturdy, meant for rides that stretched long into the afternoons of the coming year. A croquet set tucked neatly in a box, destined for backyard gatherings once the weather warmed again. And for many girls, the joy of unwrapping an easy bake oven, the small, light bulb-powered appliance that would fill kitchens with the smell of miniature cakes, shared proudly with family. Traditions varied from house to house, yet each carried a thread of timeless comfort. Some families gathered to decorate the tree together, hanging popcorn garlands and glass baubles, while Bing Crosby's voice floated from a record player. Others prepared fondue for Christmas dinner, dipping bread into bubbling cheese, a meal that felt festive and new. In many homes, the flicker of a new television console meant gathering around to watch holiday specials, each program becoming part of the family rhythm year after year. The season stretched far beyond the living room. Downtown stores lit their windows with elaborate displays, animated reindeer, glowing snowflakes, and twinkling lights that beckoned shoppers inside. Teenagers bundled in scarves and mittens strolled the aisles of Sears or Kmart, searching for the perfect gift with just a few dollars in their pockets. The smell of cinnamon from roasting nuts, the jingling of Salvation Army bells at the entrance, and the sight of friends carrying shopping bags through the cold, all became part of the holiday atmosphere. There was a certain magic in the slowness of it all. Families lingered at dinner tables long after plates were cleared, teenagers slipping away to talk with cousins, laughter echoing through hallways, board games sprawled across coffee tables, hot cocoa steamed in mugs, and the outside world felt distant, wrapped in a blanket of snow and silence. Looking back now, Christmas in the 70s and 80s shines not because of what was unwrapped, but because of what was shared. The hum of conversation, the warmth of togetherness, the glow of lights against frosted windows. These were the true gifts. Even the smallest details, the crinkle of wrapping paper, the static-filled sound of a Christmas song on the radio, the steady ticking of a clock as night fell, are remembered as treasures. For teenagers, these holidays held a balance, the joy of childhood still lingering, mixed with the budding independence of youth. They were old enough to stay up late, to join in the adult conversations, yet young enough to still believe in the magic of the season. And so, when we think of Christmas mornings in the 1970s and 1980s, we don't just remember the presents. We remember the warmth of family, the rituals that made each year unique, and the comfort of knowing that in a world changing quickly, some traditions remained steady. They were anchors of memory, glowing softly like the lights on a tree, fading with time, perhaps, but never truly gone. By the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, the American mall had become the true cathedral of teenage life. Under its fluorescent lights and endless walkways, teenagers discovered independence, friendship, and a taste of freedom, often for the first time without their parents hovering nearby. The mall wasn't only a place to shop, it was where afternoons unfolded, where small adventures began, and where countless memories were made. Picture the scene. A Saturday morning, parking lots filling fast as families and teenagers streamed toward glass doors framed in polished steel. Inside, air conditioning hummed steadily, carrying the mingled scents of soft pretzels, new clothes, and perfumes sprayed into the air by department store attendants. For teenagers, walking into a mall was like stepping into another world. Bright, loud, alive with music piped through speakers overhead, there were destinations everyone knew. Sears and Kmart for the essentials, stacks of jeans and racks of jackets that teenagers tried on in long mirrors. Walden books tucked into a quiet corner where a curious teen might flip through the latest fantasy novels or glossy magazines, imagining themselves in far-off places. But perhaps the most magical stop of all was the record store. Rows of vinyl albums and cassette tapes lined the shelves, their covers bold and colorful, inviting young hands to flip through one after another. A new album wasn't just a purchase, it was a treasure, something to bring home and play until the grooves wore thin, each note carving itself into memory. Food courts were their own kind of social stage. The bright orange glow of Orange Julius, with its frothy, sweet drinks that cooled sunburned lips in the middle of summer. The smell of sizzling burgers from Burger King or McDonald's drifting across plastic tables filled with teenagers talking loudly, their trays cluttered with French fries and crumpled napkins. Dairy Queen and Pizza Hut tucked into corners became gathering spots where first dates unfolded. Two teenagers leaning over a shared soda, trying to pretend they weren't as nervous as they felt. And then there was the fashion. Clothing stores brimmed with neon colors, jean jackets, leather belts, and posters plastered on walls. Teenagers tried on outfits together, laughing in dressing rooms, giving each other thumbs up or playful jeers. Each store felt like an opportunity to try on a different version of themselves. A band t-shirt from one shop, a flashy pair of sneakers from another. They weren't just purchases, they were statements, stitched into the identity of youth. The mall was also about chance encounters. Friends bumped into each other unexpectedly, gathered in small clusters near fountains or escalators, making plans for the evening. Groups of teenagers leaned over railings, watching the movement of crowds below, as if observing a living tapestry. Some came with pockets full of coins to spend at the small arcades hidden near food courts, the glow of Pac-Man and Space Invaders spilling into the hall. Others simply wandered, window shopping, soaking in the energy of the place without buying a thing. For many, their first job was in a mall, folding shirts, running registers, or sweeping floors. Even those hours behind a counter carried a thrill. The independence of earning your own paycheck, of being part of the bustling machine that kept the mall alive. Looking back, it wasn't about the purchases. It was about the ritual, walking those long, polished floors, carrying shopping bags that crinkled with every step, feeling both young and endlessly grown up at the same time. The mall was more than a building. It was a gathering place, a rite of passage, and a safe haven for teenage freedom. Today, many of those malls stand quiet or have vanished entirely. But for teenagers of the 70s and 80s, they remain vivid in memory. The echo of footsteps on tile floors, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the taste of an Orange Julius, the joy of flipping through records with friends. It was ordinary, yet unforgettable. And in those small adventures of shopping, eating, and wandering, youth found its rhythm. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, cars weren't just machines. They were passports to freedom. To slide into a bucket seat, to hear the growl of an engine turn over, was to feel the first real taste of adulthood. On the road, away from the gaze of parents and teachers, a teenager could be anyone they wanted to be. In the early 70s, muscle cars ruled the streets. The Plymouth GTX, with its sleek lines and unapologetic roar, drew stares as it cruised down suburban boulevards. The Barracuda, shiny and low-slung, seemed built for showing off beneath neon lights. Teens gathered in parking lots, leaning against their cars like badges of identity. A vehicle wasn't just transportation. It was a statement, a reflection of style and spirit. Some polished their rides every weekend, chrome gleaming like a mirror, while others decorated dashboards with cassette tapes, fuzzy dice, and air fresheners shaped like pine trees. Friday nights often ended in parking lots outside Burger King or McDonald's, engines idling, headlights casting pale circles across the pavement. Friends leaned on hoods, sipping sodas, sharing fries, radios turned up as the newest hits crackled through static. A car stereo could transform an ordinary sedan into a rolling concert, each bass note vibrating through the seats, every lyric sung loud enough to drown out the night. Learning to drive was its own rite of passage. Nervous hands gripped steering wheels on quiet back roads, fathers or older brothers in the passenger seat, offering patient or not-so-patient guidance. That first solo drive, with no one else in the car, was unforgettable. The hum of tires on asphalt, the soft glow of dashboard lights, the realization that for the first time, the road stretched open without limits. Road trips carried their own magic. Families packed station wagons with coolers and suitcases. Teenagers squeezed into back seats with pillows and Walkmans. Windows rolled down to let in the rush of summer air. Long highways, dotted with billboards for motels and diners, felt endless. But the laughter and whispered conversations passed the hours. At rest stops, teens bought candy and soda, stretching their legs beside trucks rumbling through the night. And when the car finally pulled back onto the road, headlights cutting through the dark, it felt like the whole world was sliding past just for them. Not every teen had a muscle car. Many drove used hand-me-downs, beat-up sedans that coughed on cold mornings. But even those cars carried freedom. To pull into a friend's driveway, to load up a trunk with bicycles, to park at the edge of a beach. It was independence in its simplest, most profound form. For some, the car was a quiet refuge, a place to sit with the radio low, to think after a long day, to dream about the future while windshield wipers kept rhythm with the rain. For others, it was a stage, revving engines at stoplights, rolling down windows to shout greetings, piling in as many friends as the seats could hold. Looking back now, the memory of those cars, muscle or modest, shines brighter than chrome. They were more than horsepower and mileage. They were freedom pressed into metal and rubber, moments of laughter sealed between doors, and dreams carried down highways that seemed to never end. For teenagers in the 70s and 80s, the road was more than a destination. It was the beginning of everything. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, the magic of technology wasn't in the palm of their hands. It glowed from arcade cabinets, television sets, and the hum of machines that felt futuristic for their time. To step into an arcade, or to sit cross-legged in front of a Saturday morning cartoon was to feel a doorway opening into new worlds, ones filled with color, sound, and the promise of endless possibility. The arcade was its own kind of kingdom. Neon lights flickered against dark walls, quarters jingled in pockets, and the steady chorus of beeps and buzzes created a rhythm unlike anything else. Pac-Man gobbled his way through mazes while teenagers crowded around, cheering or waiting for their turn. Pinball machines flashed with a satisfying clatter, each ball ricocheting off bumpers while the scoreboard tallied glowing numbers. To stand there, shoulder to shoulder with friends, eyes locked on the screen, was to feel part of something bigger, a shared rush of competition and joy. Some teenagers saved allowance money all week just to spend a Saturday night in the arcade, letting each quarter slide into the slot like a small investment in excitement. Others slipped out with friends after school, gathering in the soft glow of machines tucked away in pizza parlors and convenience stores. The games themselves were simple, but the memories were lasting. Bright red joysticks, sticky buttons from 100 different hands. The triumphant moment when your initials flashed across the high score board. Yet, technology wasn't just about games. Television carried its own rituals. Saturday mornings were sacred, reserved for cartoons that spilled across the screen in bright, exaggerated colors. Teenage years may have meant staying up later at night, but on Saturday mornings, many still found themselves on the living room floor, cereal bowl in hand, watching their favorite characters battle villains or crack jokes before the day's responsibilities began. Shows became reference points, inside jokes with friends at school, the cultural glue of an entire generation. By the late 70s and into the 80s, another revolution was stirring. Home consoles and early computers. An Atari system plugged into the family television felt like science fiction come to life. Pixels danced across the screen, and suddenly, the arcade experience could be recreated right in the living room. Families gathered together, parents sometimes joining in, laughter and good-natured competition filling the house. And in schools, the first computers began to appear, clunky machines with monochrome screens, their presence sparking curiosity about what the future might hold. Video rental stores also added to the rhythm of teenage life. To walk into a store lined with VHS tapes, to hold the heavy plastic cases of movies, was to feel a sense of wonder at how stories could be chosen, carried home, and replayed. For many, these rentals turned living rooms into private theaters, where friends gathered with bowls of popcorn and the soft whir of a VCR. Looking back now, it wasn't just about the games, the cartoons, or the machines. It was about the way they brought people together, the way friends huddled around a Pac-Man cabinet, or siblings fought over who got the first turn on Atari, or how laughter filled the air during a Saturday morning cartoon marathon. Early technology may seem quaint compared to today, but in its simplicity, it gave teenagers of the 70s and 80s something far richer, a sense of discovery, joy, and connection. And perhaps that is why these sounds, the buzz of a pinball machine, the cheerful theme of a cartoon, the soft static of a television set, still linger in memory. Soft echoes of a time when technology was not overwhelming but enchanting, and when every beep and pixel felt like a glimpse of tomorrow. For teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s, there was something almost sacred about a late-night diner or cafe. It wasn't just a place to grab a bite. It was where friendships deepened, laughter echoed across tabletops, and the night seemed to stretch just a little longer than the curfew waiting at home. Across America, neon signs cut through the dark, inviting the young and restless inside. A&W drive-ins, Bob's Big Boy, Jack in the Box, Long John Silver's. They were more than chain names. They were landmarks in the rhythm of teenage life. The clatter of trays, the hiss of soda fountains, the smell of fries and burgers. They formed the backdrop of countless small adventures. Picture it, a booth by the window, 4 or 5 teenagers squeezed onto vinyl seats, a jukebox humming in the corner. One person slid a few quarters in, flipping through the selections until the opening notes of a favorite song filled the air. Suddenly, the diner wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage. Milkshakes were passed around, fries shared, and stories told in voices that grew louder with each burst of laughter. There was a certain charm in the simplicity. No one was scrolling through phones. The only glow came from neon lights and tabletop jukeboxes. Teenagers looked at each other, really looked, eyes shining with excitement, cheeks flushed from laughter, or maybe from the courage of a first date. The clinking of silverware against plates mixed with the sound of voices and music, creating a rhythm as comforting as it was lively. For many, the diner became the first stop after a football game or a Friday night movie. Crowds of teenagers, still buzzing from the excitement of the evening, gathered around tables, retelling plays from the game, quoting lines from the film, or simply soaking in the joy of being young together. A single booth could hold an entire world, dreams about the future, frustrations about parents or school, and plans for the next weekend. And then there were the late-night stops, when the streets had quieted, but the diner still glowed. Teenagers slid into booths long after midnight, hair still damp from summer swims, or carrying the smell of gasoline from hours spent cruising. The night was theirs, and in that moment, the diner felt like home. With bottomless coffee for those pretending to be older than they were, and sundaes or burgers for everyone else, time seemed to slow, stretching out like the long highways waiting outside. Sometimes, laughter spilled so loud that strangers at other tables turned their heads and smiled, reminded of their own younger days. Other times, silence filled the booth, broken only by the sound of straws stirring soda or the crackle of a fry basket in the kitchen, as teenagers stared out the window at the empty streets, content simply to be together. Looking back now, those cafes and diners were more than places to eat. They were gathering grounds, safe harbors, and memory makers. They gave teenagers the sense that life, even in its smallest details, a shared milkshake, a jukebox song, a booth filled with friends, was something to be celebrated. And as the neon signs flickered against the night sky, they whispered a promise to every teenager who walked through their doors, that youth, laughter, and friendship could stretch far into the night, leaving echoes that would never fade. When we think of teenage life in the 1970s and 1980s, it wasn't only about fashion, concerts, or cars. Much of it was shaped in the simple, familiar spaces of play, the fields, the parks, the sidewalks, and the schoolyards where young people found their freedom. Sports and outdoor games weren't just activities. They were rituals of growing up. stitched into the fabric of daily life. On long afternoons, schoolyards filled with the crack of a bat meeting a softball or the echo of a basketball bouncing against concrete. Teenagers gathered after class, still in their school clothes, sleeves rolled, hair flying in the breeze, chasing a ball with the kind of energy that seemed limitless. Winning didn't matter as much as being together. The real prize was the laughter, the friendly arguments about rules, and the long walks home afterward, sweat cooling under the evening sky. For many, BMX bikes became their passports of freedom. In neighborhoods across America, kids built ramps from plywood and cinder blocks, testing their courage with each jump. A scraped knee or a broken chain wasn't enough to slow them down. It was part of the story, part of the pride. And the sight of a group of teenagers racing down the block, the wind whipping their jackets, was its own kind of victory. Public parks offered another stage. Roller skating rinks, open-air pools, and community fields became gathering grounds where summer days seemed endless. The 4th of July meant more than fireworks. It meant families gathering at local pools, teenagers splashing each other in the water, and the air filled with the smell of barbecue and the distant crack of firecrackers. Those were the nights when sparks lit up the sky, but the real glow came from the shared joy of the crowd. Sports were everywhere, not only on TV or in professional arenas, but in the smallest corners of everyday life. A football tossed across the street as cars slowed to pass. Pick-up basketball games under a flickering streetlight. A group of friends practicing free throws until the ball could barely be seen in the dusk. Even for those who never joined a school team, there was always a place to play, always a way to be part of the rhythm of the game. And it wasn't only about competition, it was about connection. A father teaching his daughter how to ride a bike on a quiet sidewalk. Friends roller skating along boardwalks, the sound of wheels humming over wood, laughter spilling into the salty air. Boys and girls sprawled in the grass after a game, sipping sodas from glass bottles, talking about nothing and everything all at once. Looking back now, those parks and playgrounds feel like the heart of teenage life. They were places where the rules of the adult world fell away for a while, where teenagers could shout, run, fall, and rise again without fear of judgment. They carried within them the spirit of endless summers, the smell of freshly cut grass, the metallic clang of chain-link fences, the warm pavement beneath sneakers. It was in these spaces that friendships deepened, that romances quietly bloomed, and that young people learned the joy of moving, of laughing, of simply being alive. The games may have ended when the sun dipped low, but the memories linger, timeless and golden, echoing still in the fields and playgrounds of a bygone America. Not every memory of teenage life in the 1970s and 1980s glows with neon or sunshine. Beneath the laughter and freedom, there were shadows, realities that shaped the backdrop of those years. For many who grew up in the cities, especially New York, the streets carried both excitement and unease. The subways told the story best. Graffiti bloomed across every surface, spray-painted names, murals, symbols of rebellion and survival. To ride a subway car in the late 70s was to step into a moving canvas, one that spoke of both creativity and chaos. Teenagers leaned back against worn seats, music playing softly from a cassette player, eyes drifting over the painted walls. Some saw beauty in the color, others only the sign of a city struggling. There were moments when reality intruded sharply. The garbage strike of the 1970s left entire blocks piled high with trash, the air heavy with the smell of decay. Teenagers walking home from school passed mountains of black bags stacked against sidewalks, rats darting in and out. It was a sight impossible to forget, an image of a city brought to its knees by its own weight. The oil crisis of 1973 left its own mark. Gas lines stretched for blocks, cars idling in silence as their drivers waited hours for a few precious gallons. Teenagers watched their parents worry over prices or felt the sting themselves when weekend plans were canceled because the tank was too low. Cruising the streets was no longer as simple as turning the key. Every drop of gas had to be considered. And then there was the harder truth of homelessness. Cities swelled with people who had nowhere to go, cardboard shelters tucked into doorways, blankets pulled tight against the cold. For teenagers, it was a quiet lesson in contrast. The thrill of freedom alongside the sight of those who had lost theirs. Some passed quickly, eyes averted, while others carried those images with them, etched into memory. Yet even in those tougher realities, there was resilience. Teenagers still found ways to laugh, to carve out their own spaces of joy. A graffiti-covered subway car might have felt dangerous to some, but for others, it became a symbol of art, a pulse of defiance that matched the restless energy of youth. The oil crisis may have dimmed road trips, but it made each ride feel more precious. The garbage strike may have filled the streets with decay, but even then, life continued. Kids playing stickball on sidewalks, stepping carefully around the piles, their laughter rising above the smell. For those who came of age in that time, these struggles were part of the landscape. They didn't erase the warmth of teenage life. They sharpened it. The laughter in diners, the thrill of concerts, the freedom of the beach, all felt brighter against the backdrop of hardship. Looking back, these memories remind us that the teenage years of the 70s and 80s were not a perfect postcard. They were a blend of color and shadow, freedom and restraint, joy and struggle. And perhaps that is why they endure so strongly in the hearts of those who live them, because they carried not only the sweetness of youth, but also the strength of survival, the resilience of finding light even in the darkest corners of the city. If the streets, malls, and beaches were the public stage of teenage life, then family homes and bedrooms were the private sanctuaries. Behind the doors of modest suburban houses, city apartments, or rural farmhouses, the true heart of the 1970s and 1980s teenager could be found, not in crowds, but in quiet corners. Bedrooms, in particular, carried an unmistakable identity. Posters curled at the edges on paneled walls, rock bands, movie stars, muscle cars, or maybe just a favorite athlete staring down with silent encouragement. A cassette deck sat on a dresser, its buttons worn from constant rewinds and playbacks. The radio, too, was always close by, tuned to FM stations where Casey Kasem's voice introduced the top 40, or late-night hosts whispered secrets to restless teens. The glow of a lava lamp or a neon sign might light up the space, casting soft colors that made the room feel like its own little world. Every detail mattered. The bedspread chosen carefully, sometimes patterned with bold 70s stripes or pastel 80s swirls. The stack of notebooks on a desk filled with doodles, lyrics, and dreams. A milk crate of vinyl records pushed under the bed, albums sliding in and out like well-kept treasures. It was here that teenagers planned their tomorrows, whispered on the phone for hours with friends, or simply lay back and let music spill through headphones until sleep finally arrived. Beyond the bedrooms, the heartbeat of the family home was always the kitchen. The smell of TV dinners baking in the oven or pizza fresh from delivery boxes drifted across the table. Families gathered not for grand feasts, but for everyday meals, macaroni and cheese, meatloaf, or perhaps a casserole pulled from a Pyrex dish. The conversation flowed in its familiar rhythm. Parents asking about school, siblings bickering over chores, and teenagers trying to slip away early to join friends. The living room, too, was a place of memory. Wood-paneled walls framed the glow of a console television where families watched Happy Days or The Brady Bunch together. Teenagers sprawled on shag carpets, flipping channels with the chunky dial, or playing Atari until the screen buzzed with static. Somewhere in the corner, Polaroid snapshots sat tucked in frames, catching grins from birthdays, graduations, or Christmas mornings. And yet, even in these simple homes, there was warmth. The hum of the dishwasher after dinner, the soft creak of the stairs, the murmur of parents talking in another room. These became part of the soundscape of growing up. For many teenagers, the house was both a safe harbor and a place they longed to outgrow. They decorated their bedrooms like declarations of independence, but still drifted downstairs when the smell of popcorn or the laughter of siblings filled the air. Looking back now, those homes remind us that teenage life wasn't just about big moments. It was also the quiet spaces, the late-night radio drifting through thin walls, the poster taped above the bed, the hum of the refrigerator at midnight while sneaking a soda. These were the textures of ordinary life, stitched into the heart as deeply as concerts, beaches, or road trips. In the end, the family home was both anchor and springboard. It grounded teenagers in love and routine, even as their bedrooms filled with dreams too big to be contained. And though the posters faded, the cassette players fell silent, and the neon lamps dimmed, the memory of those rooms and the feeling of safety they carried remains timeless, glowing softly in the corners of the heart. School days in the 1970s and 1980s carried their own rhythm, steady, predictable, and yet full of small, unforgettable details. For many teenagers, mornings began with the rumble of the bright yellow school bus winding its way down neighborhood streets. The doors opened with a familiar squeak, and kids climbed aboard carrying backpacks, lunch boxes decorated with superheroes or pop stars, and a handful of whispered conversations about homework, music, or last night's television shows. The chatter mixed with the hum of the engine, creating a soundtrack that set the tone for the day ahead. Cafeterias and classrooms formed the backdrop of daily life. Teenagers lined up for lunch in long rows, greeted by the lunch ladies who knew every face and every appetite. Trays filled with sloppy joes, pizza squares, cartons of milk, or perhaps Jell-O cups balanced precariously as students searched for seats. The lunchroom buzzed with laughter, gossip, and whispered secrets, friendships sealed not by grand gestures, but by the simple act of saving a seat. Inside the classrooms, the world unfolded in chalk and paper. Teachers guided students through typing classes on clattering machines, the rhythmic punch of keys, filling the air like a chorus of small hammers. In history rooms, maps of the world stretched across the walls and globes spun under curious fingers. Science classes brought the smell of chalk dust and Bunsen burners, while English teachers encouraged stories scribbled into spiral notebooks. These lessons, though ordinary, left marks deeper than they seemed, shaping how teenagers thought, dreamed, and planned for their futures. Holidays and special events carried their own sparkle. Christmas parties in classrooms meant decorated bulletin boards, construction paper chains, and plates of cookies brought in from home. Teachers might dim the lights to play a holiday cartoon on a wheeled-in television, the kind strapped down with buckles to keep it steady. Field trips brought the thrill of stepping outside the school walls, riding buses to museums, zoos, or historic sites, all while giggling with friends in the back row. These days, simple as they were, often became the highlights remembered long after the lessons themselves had faded. Recess and after-school activities stitched the fabric of community together. On playgrounds, kids raced across blacktops painted with 4 square courts and hopscotch grids. Softball games gathered cheers on dusty diamonds, while track meets brought teenagers running beneath the wide sky. School gyms echoed with pep rallies, where cheerleaders shook pom-poms and marching bands filled the air with brass and drum beats. Every sound carried both the excitement of the present and the anticipation of what came next. What made these school days special wasn't just the structure of bells and classes, but the fleeting moments that teenagers tucked away in their hearts. Passing notes folded into perfect triangles, doodling in the margins of a math book, or leaning against lockers, waiting for the final bell. The awkwardness of first crushes, the joy of inside jokes, the thrill of small rebellions, all of it unfolded within hallways lined with lockers and tiled floors. Looking back, the schools of the 70s and 80s were more than buildings. They were places where friendships bloomed, confidence grew, and life lessons quietly took root. For teenagers, they were worlds of possibility wrapped in the ordinary, spaces where laughter and learning intertwined, and where the smallest of memories became lifelong treasures. There was a certain sweetness in the smallest errands of teenage life during the 1970s and 1980s. These weren't grand adventures or extraordinary milestones, just the little trips and simple tasks that stitched themselves into the rhythm of daily living. And yet, looking back, they are remembered with a tenderness that speaks to how deeply ordinary moments can define an era. A teenager might be asked to ride along with a parent to the corner store or the local A&P. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, letting out the cool air scented faintly of waxed linoleum, coffee grounds, and fresh produce. Rows of bright boxes and cans lined the shelves, and kids trailed behind carts, sneaking glances at the candy aisle or flipping through the comic books on the magazine rack. Sometimes, the reward for patience was simple: a pack of gum, a chocolate bar, or maybe a glass bottle of Coke that clinked cold in the hand. Errands weren't only about groceries. They were also about phone calls and photographs, the small rituals of connection in an age before instant messaging or digital cameras. Public phone booths stood on street corners, their glass sides smudged by fingerprints, the receiver cool and heavy in a teenager's palm. Dropping a coin into the slot, they heard the clatter of change as the line clicked open, connecting them to a friend's voice across town. Those brief calls, arranging a movie night, a ride, or just saying hello were short but filled with anticipation. And then there were Kodak moments, captured on film that had to be dropped off and developed. Teenagers snapped pictures with chunky cameras, sometimes careful, sometimes carefree, never knowing exactly how the images would turn out. A birthday party, a trip to the mall, a car parked at an angle just right, all preserved in grainy color with the soft edges of time. Picking up envelopes of glossy prints at the drugstore was its own small thrill, flipping through and laughing at the blurred shots, or marveling at the candid ones that seemed to capture life exactly as it felt. Even chores held a kind of charm when seen from the distance of memory. Helping a parent carry bags, mowing the lawn before dinner, or walking down to the post office to drop off a letter. All simple acts that grounded teenagers in the daily heartbeat of their communities. Along the way, there were neighbors to wave at, familiar sidewalks to cross, and the comfort of knowing that life, while not always easy, had a dependable rhythm. What shines through in these recollections isn't the errand itself, but the small joys tucked within. The sound of coins clinking in a vending machine, the fizz of a soda popped open on a hot day, the smell of paper and ink inside a stationery shop, the warmth of a parent's voice saying, "Thanks for coming along." These moments weren't glamorous, but they lingered. Ordinary fragments of days that shaped a generation's sense of belonging. For teenagers in the 70s and 80s, everyday errands were more than tasks. They were little windows into independence, glimpses of a larger world waiting just beyond the driveway, and quiet chances to carve out memories that would one day feel like treasures. Freedom for teenagers in the 1970s and 1980s carried a kind of daring energy, equal parts innocence and rebellion. It wasn't just about breaking rules. It was about testing the edges of possibility, pushing against the walls of childhood, and stepping into the wide, untamed promise of youth. Think of a keg party hidden at the edge of town, where someone's older cousin had borrowed a truck and set up music speakers in a field. The night hummed with the scent of cut grass, faint gasoline, and cheap beer poured into plastic cups. A bonfire might flicker nearby, shadows dancing across jean jackets and bell-bottoms. There was always a mix of laughter, nervousness, and the sense that these nights belonged to no one but the kids who showed up. For many, it wasn't the drinking itself, but the thrill of being there. Part of something secret, something unsupervised, a taste of the adult world that still felt out of reach. And then there was hitchhiking. It seems almost impossible now, in an age of car seats and GPS tracking. But for teenagers of the era, sticking out a thumb on the side of the road was simply another way to get around. Maybe it was a ride to a friend's house, maybe to the mall, maybe to the next town over for a concert. The risk was there, but so was the excitement, the feeling of being untethered, of going where the day or night might take you. With a backpack slung over one shoulder and the wind pulling at their hair, teenagers felt the roads belonged to them in a way that is hard to imagine today. Nights at the arcade captured another kind of freedom. Quarters stacked neatly on the edge of a Pac-Man machine, laughter rising above the electronic beeps and the clatter of pinball flippers. Groups of friends huddled around a glowing screen, shouting advice, cheering victories. It wasn't just about the games. It was about the independence of having a few dollars in your pocket, the ability to stay out late, and the promise that your parents might never know exactly where you had been. The arcade was both public and private, a space where the rules of the outside world dimmed under the glow of neon lights, and the mall, bright, sprawling, alive, was its own universe of freedom. Teenagers roamed the wide tiled floors like explorers, ducking into record stores to thumb through stacks of vinyl, slipping into clothing shops to try on fashions that might shock or impress. The food court was a meeting ground, Orange Julius in hand, gossip traded over pizza slices. The mall wasn't just a place to buy, it was a stage for fashion, for romance, for friendship. It was where you could reinvent yourself in a single afternoon, walking out with a new poster, a new shirt, or simply a new story to tell. The spirit of teenage freedom in those years wasn't about recklessness, so much as it was about possibility. A keg party in the fields, a thumb out on the side of the highway, a quarter slipped into an arcade machine, or an afternoon wandering the mall. All of it spoke to a time when boundaries were looser, when trust was wider, and when the world still seemed wide open. Looking back now, it feels like a fragile kind of magic, something that could only exist in that moment between childhood and adulthood, in a country that itself felt young enough to let its kids roam. For the teenagers who lived it, those nights and weekends still glow in memory, half daring, half tender, reminders of what it once meant to be free. As our long journey together begins to fade into quiet, it is worth pausing to let the images settle. The high school parking lots filled with laughter, the neon glow of diners, the summer freedom of California beaches, the bustling streets of New York, the malls, the music, the arcades. All of it forms a mosaic of what it meant to be a teenager in the 1970s and 1980s. It was a time when life moved slower, even when the world itself seemed to be racing ahead with change. Teenagers could taste freedom in the smallest things. A first drive down the open road, a shared milkshake with friends, a quarter slipped into a pinball machine, or a warm Friday night filled with the sound of distant music. It was not a perfect world, and there were struggles and crises, but the spirit of youth, the laughter, the daring, the friendships, somehow always rose above the noise. Being a teenager in those decades was about living between innocence and independence, balanced on the edge of possibility. No smartphones, no constant screens, just the feel of the wind as you biked to a friend's house, the joy of buying your first record, the quiet of a bedroom decorated with posters and cassette tapes, and the thrill of staying out later than you were supposed to. For many, these memories now feel like soft echoes, blurred around the edges but warm at their core, and perhaps that is why they linger so deeply. Youth was not measured in grades or in likes, not in headlines or deadlines, but in the ordinary rhythm of days. Walking through the mall, cheering at a school game, catching a ride with a friend, unwrapping a Christmas gift beside the glow of the tree. These were the details that gave color to life. They may seem small, but in memory, they shine brighter than anything else. As the night deepens, allow yourself to imagine those years once more. The world outside your window may be different now, faster, noisier, more complicated, but somewhere within you lives the same gentle freedom that defined your youth. Close your eyes and return, if only in thought, to a time when the air was filled with music from the radio, when the arcade lights shimmered, when your biggest worry might have been what to wear on Saturday night. Let those thoughts soften your breathing, slow your heart, and guide you into rest. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, may the memories of teenage years long past feel like a warm blanket wrapped around you. The laughter of friends, the glow of neon, the smell of fresh-cut grass and French fries, all of it still belongs to you, tucked away in the quiet corners of your mind. And here, at the close of our journey, I want to thank you for spending this time with us at Sleepytown Radio. These stories live on because of you. Your memories, your reflections, your willingness to pause and listen to the past. If tonight's gentle journey stirred something within you, perhaps a favorite memory, a forgotten song, or a snapshot of your own teenage years, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your stories matter, and they help weave this community together, thread by thread. If you found peace, comfort, or a touch of nostalgia here tonight, I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel so that you'll never miss the next quiet story. A like, a share, or even a simple word in the comments helps this little corner of the internet grow, so that more hearts can find calm and more restless nights can be soothed. Now, dear listener, it is time to rest. Let the day slip away. May your dreams be filled with the glow of old neon signs, the warmth of family homes, the hum of a jukebox in the corner of a diner. May sleep come gently, as it once did on long summer nights when the air was warm and the world felt safe. Good night, my friend. Sleep well, and thank you for being here. Until next time, this has been Sleepytown Radio. Quiet stories for quiet hearts.